My name is David. In the summer of 2020, this happened to me. In an old cabin I rented in Montana, just outside Glacier National Park. I was having a pretty bad time in the city at the time. I had quit my job. I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I was depressed. I needed a remote, quiet place. I wanted to clear my head. This cottage I came across on the internet was just as I imagined it. A one-room wooden structure, surrounded by pine forests. The nearest neighbor is a few miles away. I rented it right away. I was going to stay there for a week. The first days were great. I took walks, built fires, and read books. There was no cell phone reception, but it didn't matter. I wanted to be alone anyway. Until the fourth night. That night, I felt the fear of death for the first time in my life. That evening, the weather was good. The sky was clear and the stars were shining. I was roasting marshmallows by myself. As the clock approached midnight, I decided to put out the fire. I went inside and locked the door. I closed the windows. I went to bed. Just then, I heard a noise, a very faint crunch, like someone's footsteps. It was very close. I didn't even breathe. The footsteps were going around the cabin. At first, I thought it might be a deer. Here in nature, such things were normal. But then, I saw the doorknob move slightly. Someone was trying to open the door. All the alarm systems inside me went off at once. I didn't have any weapons. I only had a camping knife. I slowly got out of bed. I quietly made my way to the kitchen. I took the knife. I saw a shadow behind the door. The moon-like silhouette was shooting. And then, knock, 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 knock. 3 times, lightly knocking on the door. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I thought maybe he'd give up and leave. But that person, he kept waiting in front of the door. And then, he went to the window. He tapped gently on the glass. Click, 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 click. Now I had only one thing to do. An escape plan. At the back of the hut, there was a small service door. My feet were silent. Just as I was about to open the door, the front door was being ripped off. Someone was really trying to get in. In a panic, I opened the back door and ran out. I ran into the forest. In the moonlight, I could barely make out the path ahead. I heard heavy footsteps behind me. Someone was following me. As I ran through the forest, branches scratched my face, my feet hit rocks, and my knees bled. But I didn't stop. I was out of breath. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I didn't dare look back. I was just running. At one point, my foot caught on a piece of root, and I fell to the ground. I stuck my face into the muddy earth. My knife flew out of my hand. Footsteps were approaching from behind me. I looked around desperately. There was a boulder in my field of vision. I gathered all my strength and picked it up. I can never forget the moment when our eyes met in the dark. There was a man in front of me. He was wearing a torn jacket, muddy pants. His face was covered in dirt. His eyes, he had the eyes of a madman. Whatever I thought at that moment, I swung the rock with all my might. I hit him in the head. He staggered. I don't know if he collapsed, because I immediately jumped up and started running again. I ran non-stop for about 10 minutes. Finally, I reached the place where I parked my car. My keys were in my pocket. I opened the door with shaking hands. I jumped in the car. I started the engine and drove away in a puff of smoke. When I got to my car, I was crying. It was the first time I had ever been so scared for my life. In the morning, I went to the sheriff. I told him what had happened. We went back to the cabin together. The front door was really broken. There were footprints inside, but they couldn't find any trace of the man. Not a trace. No blood. No cigarette butts. Not a piece of clothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed him up. The sheriff said to me, "Fugitives hide here from time to time. Escaped convicts or homeless people, sometimes they can be very dangerous. After that day, my love for nature continued. Yes, but I never go alone anymore. My name is Michael. This happened in October of 2017. My friends still make fun of me when I tell them about it, but I lived it myself and no one can convince me otherwise. I live in New Hampshire. We have an old family cabin a couple of hours up in the North Woods. My grandfather built it, and then it was passed down to my father. I spent most of my summer vacations there when I was a kid. Years later, when things were very busy and my head was full, I decided to take a weekend getaway. I wanted to go to the old cabin, to relax a bit, to reminisce a bit about my childhood. I wanted to go alone. I didn't tell anyone else. I threw a few things in the car: spare clothes, some food, a flashlight, and, of course, my phone. But there was no reception there anyway. When I arrived at the hut, everything was normal. The autumn wind was shaking the trees. Leaves were everywhere. It was a slightly eerie atmosphere, but I was used to it until nightfall. The first night was quite peaceful. I lit the wood stove, wrapped myself in a blanket, and started reading an old book. By midnight, the stove was almost out. My eyes were getting heavy. I stood up to go to bed. At that moment, I heard a noise outside. A slight rattling is coming from the front window. At first, I thought it was the wind and didn't pay much attention. Then, very distinctly, it sounded like a fingernail tapping on the glass. Click, 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 click. Knock, knock, click, 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 click. And I saw a woman right outside my window. She was wearing a white dress. Her hair was long and messy. Her face was not clearly visible. But her eyes, those eyes, she was looking right into mine. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I don't know if a minute passed or 10 minutes, but she kept standing there. She didn't move at all, just staring. And then she just disappeared. I blinked. I looked again. There was nothing, just shadows in the trees, swaying in the wind. I buried myself under the blanket, like we did when we were kids. I believed the blanket would protect me, but it wasn't over. In the morning, the door creaked slightly, as if someone was forcing the door from outside. I opened my eyes. A slight chill filled the air. With the wind under the door, wet footprints were crawling. Yes, wet footprints. I slowly sat up. My hands were shaking with fear. I looked towards the door, and in the small glass part of the door, I saw her again, this time more clearly. Her face was completely white, her eyes were black, and she was crying. Black tears were falling from her black eyes. Her lips were moving, but there was no sound. She was trying to say something, but there was no sound. I had a strange urge. I wanted to open the door, as if I should help her, as if I should go with her. But just as I put my hand on the door handle, something fell behind me, inside the hut. A stool. It toppled over for no reason. I was startled by the sound, and I was like I'd been hypnotized. I threw myself back. I pulled the door handle. The woman kept looking at me, and then it was as if she melted away with the wind. I grabbed my bag. I ran to the car, and I left that forest, never to return. Afterwards, I talked to my grandparents. My grandfather told me that years ago, a woman had disappeared near that cabin. A young woman. She had a fight with her husband and disappeared in the woods at night. Her body was never found, and that the people who stayed in the hut, from time to time, they would see a woman in the window. I had never heard that story until then, but now I know. Sometimes, the ghosts of the past are not forgotten. Sometimes they're still there, and sometimes they come to your window in the middle of the night, just to look, or to take you with them. My name is Josh. I'm 36 years old. I tried to explain what happened to me. I searched for a scientific explanation, but there isn't. Every time I remember it, it gives me goosebumps. Because I lost a day, and that day, I still don't know where it went. In the fall of 2019, I went to my family's old forest cabin in the state of Vermont. The cabin hadn't been used by anyone for years. When my father grew old, no one came by. The cabin was rotting, so I decided to take a weekend getaway to fix it up a bit and clean it out. I threw repair tools, food, and a sleeping bag in my car. There was no electricity, no water, but that's okay. Sometimes one should go back to nature. On the way, everything was normal. The air was cool, and yellow leaves were falling from the trees. Nothing seemed to go wrong. When I arrived at the hut, it was a complete wreck. The roof was leaking in some places. There was an old smell of dampness inside. But these were the things I expected. I fixed a few broken windows and temporarily repaired the roof. Then I gathered some wood and lit the stove. I stopped working around 3 in the afternoon. I wanted to walk in the woods for a while. There was a little stream we used to go to when we were children. I wanted to go there. I put on my boots, took my jacket, a flashlight, and a small backpack and went into the forest. Walking in the forest was peaceful. The rustling of the trees, the sound of the gentle breeze. It was as if all the problems in the world had disappeared. I found the stream. I even sat for a while and skipped stones by the water. Then I realized that the sun was getting lower. I looked at my watch. That's when the first strangeness started. My watch, 6:23, but the sun wasn't even about to set yet. At this latitude, in October, it gets dark at 6 o'clock. Something was strange. I took out my phone. My hand trembled as I opened the screen. The date was a day later, and the time, 8:07 in the morning. I was confused. Maybe the phone is broken, I thought. I decided to go back to the hut. I started walking back along the path. But I couldn't find the right path. It was as if the path had changed. The trees had moved. Suddenly, the forest was a place I didn't recognize. My heart began to pound. I was lost in a forest I had known since my childhood. I wandered for hours. The forest was like a maze to me. It was as if I had passed by the same tree many times. The sun set. It got colder. I had to turn on my flashlight. As I walked, I heard murmurs that sounded like human voices, a child's laughter, a woman's whisper. In the darkness, out of the corner of my eye, I could see shadows, but there was no one. When I made it back to the hut, it was moonlight. I was relieved when I got to the door. When I went inside, everything was in its place. The wood in the stove had gone out. The food on the table was untouched. But I noticed something. There were footprints besides my own. Muddy footprints all over the inside of the hut. They were right next to my bed. I looked at my watch again, and I was shocked again. The calendar on my phone showed 2 days had passed. I had only gone for a walk, a few hours. But according to the calendar, I was missing 2 days. I have no logical answer to explain this. When I arrived in town, I went into a coffee shop. The woman behind the counter looked at me strangely. "We saw you here the other day," she said. "You were wearing a blue coat. Now you're wearing a brown jacket." I wore that brown jacket going into the forest. I left my blue jacket in the car. So, was it me that day or was it someone else? I still don't know. My name is Kevin. I live in southern Ohio, about an hour and a half from Cincinnati. Telling this story still hits me like a punch in the gut, because I know that night, in the fall of 2016, my brother Alex and I planned a weekend getaway. We were both tired of the noise of the city. Our father had an old cabin in the woods that he used to hunt in. There was no electricity, no water, but for us it meant being alone with nature. We set off by car on Friday afternoon. It was slightly rainy, but the sweet smell of autumn was in the air. After a few hours of traveling, we reached the hut. The hut seemed to be lost in the dense trees. It had a rotten porch and a moss-covered roof, but we didn't care. That night, we were just planning to build a fire, drink beer, and relax a bit. Everything was fine until midnight. After putting out the fire, we retreated into the hut. It was cold inside, but we had thick sleeping bags. We told some old stories and laughed. Then we slowly fell asleep. I don't know what time it was, but sometime in the night, I was awakened by a noise. It was as if someone was walking around the hut. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was a dream. I closed my eyes tightly and said, "Never mind, you're dreaming." But the sounds came closer. The sound of dry branches crunching. I was startled. Alex was awake too. I could tell by his breathing. I asked him in a whisper, "Can you hear me?" He nodded. At that moment, even the walls of the cabin could hear my heartbeat. We had a flashlight. I reached out quietly and picked it up. I shone it out the window. I will never forget what I saw. At the back of the hut, there was someone in the trees. It wasn't very clear, but you could see someone's shadow. He was watching us. He obviously had no intention of running away. On the contrary, it was like he was preparing to do something. Alex immediately moved towards the door. We hadn't locked the door. In places like this, you don't feel the need to lock it. But that night, we made a mistake. We locked the door and put a chair behind it. Meanwhile, the person outside walked slowly out onto the porch. We heard the creaking of the boards very clearly. Then, he started turning the door handle. He was trying to get in. Alex put another chair in front of the door. I picked up the old shotgun. It had been there for years. I didn't know if it still worked inside. At that moment, my heart was beating in my mouth. The door started to push harder, then silence. Nothing happened for a minute or two. Just when I was about to relax, glass shattered in the back window. Someone was trying to get in through the window. I reflexively pointed the rifle. I pressed the trigger. There was a huge explosion. It echoed inside the little hut. I heard a shout, then footsteps running away. Alex and I ran out the door and onto the porch. We shone the flashlight into the woods. No one could be seen. There was only a hat that had fallen to the ground, an old hunter's hat with a camouflage pattern. We picked it up. Then we ran to the car. We started the engine and ran out of there. The next day, we reported it to the sheriff. When they investigated, they told us about a man who had disappeared in the area a few weeks before. He was mentally unstable. He had been hiding in the woods for years. The sheriff told us, "He probably just wanted to scare you." But I felt something else. That night, if the rifle hadn't been fired, if we hadn't woken up, I wouldn't be here today telling this story. Now, when I go into the woods, I always take a working locked door and a loaded gun. My name is Mike. I grew up in Florida, but for the last couple of years I've been working up north in Montana. I'm a woodworker, so the woods are like my second home. One Friday night last year after work, I decided to go out into the woods for a little distraction. I only took a small backpack. It had some water, a knife, a lighter, and a flashlight. My goal was to walk for a couple of hours and then go back to the car. So I didn't even take a compass. That turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes of my life. The weather was beautiful. The sky was clear. There was a cool wind. I walked into the forest. At first, everything was wonderful. The light filtering through the trees, the sound of birds, the crunching leaves. But before I realized it, hours had passed. The sun was getting lower, and I started to panic a little bit. Because the Montana woods are no joke. The temperature can drop below zero at night, and wolves and bears, anything can happen. I took out my flashlight, but it had very little battery left. I tried to turn back, but the forest turns into something else with the darkness. The trees look alike, the paths disappear, and it's like you feel like the forest is starting to breathe. That's when I noticed a building to my left, a hut. It was as if it was hidden in the forest. From the outside, it looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof was caved in, the windows broken, and the door half ajar. But it seemed safer than spending the night out in the open. I walked quickly towards the hut. When I entered, I smelled a pungent odor of dampness. The wooden floorboards were broken. There was a table, an overturned chair, and an old fireplace in the corner. I shone my flashlight on the wall. Mold stains, cobwebs, and something nailed to the wall. A picture of a child. There was writing on it, "Welcome to my home." I got goosebumps. But at that moment there was a humming outside. Was it the wind, or was something approaching? I closed the door. I leaned the overturned chair against it. I decided to sit in the corner, knife in hand, and wait until morning. But that night was not easy. The first few hours were spent in silence, just the natural sounds of the forest. But around midnight, something strange happened. There was a creaking on the roof, as if someone was walking on the roof. All my muscles tensed. I couldn't even breathe. Then, I heard a sound from the back wall of the hut, like a fingernail scraping, scratching. I put my back against the wall, knife in hand, and stared at the door. It seemed like hours, but maybe it was only a few minutes. And then, the doorknob moved slightly. Someone was behind the door, silently trying to open it. It's now or never. I gathered all my courage and ran screaming towards the door. I knocked over the chair and pushed the door. I jumped out. It was freezing outside. I scanned the moonlight. There was no one. There were fresh footprints on the ground a few feet away. Bare footprints. The footprints of a small child. I froze. At that moment, I saw a face looking at me through the window of the hut. A child's face. But there was no normal expression on his face. His eyes were black and his mouth was open in a big grin. I couldn't look any longer. I immediately ran into the forest. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to get away. I ran for hours. I twisted my ankle. My hands were covered in blood. But finally, I came to a forest road. When I was found by a farmer at dawn, I almost lost consciousness. Then I told the police about the hut, so they investigated. The only thing they found was that the hut belonged to a family 30 years ago, and their youngest son, Josh, went missing one night. His body was never found. The police said, "You must have imagined it. Tiredness, fear, cold. Maybe it is, maybe not. Sometimes when I wake up at night, I still hear that scraping sound in my ears.